this. Hello everyone and welcome to Anime Club After Dark, the podcast that delves into all things anime, manga, and otaku culture related. I'm your host Alex, but you can call me Senpai, and joining me tonight I just have our chivalry of Shota's Shotaro.
I'm enjoying watching those archery boys shoot.
What are they shooting?
Many things.
Is it actually a good show? Because I am thinking about picking it up.
It's KyoAni and they don't hold back on the animation, so it's beautiful and it's so gay. There's like 3 episodes out. There's already like 7 ships. Girl, you know it.
I want to just clarify something. We're talking about the new KyoAni show. Was it called Tsurune?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's basically about archery boys, and it looks really good from the previews that I've seen. I'm really considering picking it up, so I guess it has your endorsement so far.
Yes.
All right, so we don't really have any announcements or news to get into, so we're just going to get right into it. We're talking about something that I guess is kind of a niche topic to be talking about, and that is this idea of copyright law in Japan as it relates to Doujinshi. Now, I know a lot of you out there probably already know what Doujinshi is, but we're going to start off by actually defining what it is for the 5 people out there that probably don't know what it is. So, I actually didn't know this until we started reading up about this topic, that Doujinshi is actually a combination of 2 different words: Doujin, which means same person, and shi, which is short for zashi, which is a magazine. So a doujinshi is quite literally a self-published magazine that caters to a specific group of people. That's like the literal definition of doujinshi. Did you actually know that before we read into this?
Nope.
I didn't either. I was shocked. We always, me and you, and I'm sure many other people do this too. Like, we use the word doujin as like a short form of doujinshi.
I use the word DJ. It confuses people.
I know. I used to do that too, but I found out like people were really confused by that. But yeah, I think a lot of us use the short form of that, doujin, but it's a separate word, and it literally means a group of people with shared interests.
Yeah. So basically, in layman's terms, it's like an indie comic. That's what a doujinshi is. Yeah, and I think there's this false perception out there that although a lot of doujinshi do cater to certain like sexual like fetishes and like they sexualize characters in existing media, doujinshi by nature don't have to be like sexually explicit. No, but only the good ones are. You can certainly make the case that a lot of the good ones are, and they don't necessarily have to be derivative either. I mean, there are some like original doujinshi out there with original characters and original stories too. I actually prefer, personally, original doujinshi. I actually do as well. I don't know. It's easier to get immersed in the story. It is, especially when, there's not already established characters who have established personality traits and they're doing all these things, and it's like, this seems really out of character for these people, but okay. Yeah. But the thing we're actually going to really get into tonight is how since doujinshi is a lot of them that aren't original works are a derivative to things that are copyrighted works. That's what we really want to talk about tonight. And I think one of the things we can start off talking about is how like Japanese law differentiates from how it's done in the West with regards to like derivative works, especially derivative fan works. And that's like these anime and manga companies that produce these copyrighted materials that doujinshi end up being based off of, typically turn a blind eye to the artists that create doujinshi. Yeah, and it's been that way pretty much forever. I don't know how long it's been that way, honestly, but it comes as pretty shocking when, like, for me, who's Canadian, this kind of thing where an independent, self-published work that is using characters from somewhere else and is selling these works is allowed to do that legally. That's just so strange, because that wouldn't happen in Canada.
No, it wouldn't happen in America either. I mean, I just can look at all these people. Like there's really talented people like on YouTube who will create like these fan films for different properties that exist here in the West, and a lot of these companies will let it go until they get to a certain point of popularity, and then they're like, "Nah, shut it down."
Yeah.
A really good example of that, which I can actually relate to the anime industry. So I know you don't like it when I talk about this, but there was a fan project on YouTube called Star Trek Continues that actually starred Vic Mignogna, who is a prominent English language dub voice actor. And that ended up getting shut down by CBS, who now own the rights to Star Trek, about, I think, 2 years ago now. And they only shut it down because, well, two reasons. It started to get really, really popular, and it was really well produced. And CBS introduced these draconian fan project guidelines that basically killed off the project. They basically said, you can produce fan works of this as long as it's bad.
And an example I can think of is a fan game for the IP Yu-Gi-Oh!, which was the fan project was Dueling Network, which was huge. It was a browser-based simulator of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game that you could play. Since you didn't have to download any programs, you could play it on any device, and it had all the cards, and you could just play it whenever, wherever. It was super convenient, especially since Konami didn't actually release an online simulator themselves. There was no way to do it except by doing it fan-wise. But Dueling Network got shut down because Konami decided to release their own quote-unquote online simulator, which is like, oh god, I forgot the name, but it's a mobile app, which isn't actually an online simulator because it doesn't actually have all the cards. So, RIP, no more Dueling Network.
Yeah, and you know what? That's something that sort of irks me slightly because, like, I look at some of these, and I think we'll talk about this more in a second, but I think a lot of these companies that do this, especially in the West, will shut down these fan projects who, some of them are done by incredibly creative and talented people, both like artists and like in the what you were talking about, the Dueling Network, is like obviously some good programming went into it. That a lot of these companies have a gold mine here where they could actually hire these people to work on this stuff and make it the way that the fans, because these people are obviously already fans and they know what other fans want.
Exactly. I am literally willing to pay for an online simulator of Yu-Gi-Oh, but you won't provide it to me, Konami. You just won't.
Or even like Konami could approach these people and say, "Hey, we know what you're doing is kind of violating our copyright, but would, let us license it.
Exactly.
Let us pay you to have the rights to this. Like, give us the rights to this, and we will pay you in return."
Exactly.
I mean, it's a much more symbiotic relationship between like fans and the people that make this stuff, and I think that's something that anime and manga studios have kind of learned when it comes to doujinshi, that makes this symbiotic relationship work.
Well, like, okay, so a major issue with this that relates to this is that the rights owners are going to be losing profits if they let the fan projects go by themselves, and we've been recommending, why don't you just license it? But Japan does neither. They don't license it, they just let it go.
Yeah, they kind of take what I'd like to refer to as like a laissez-faire approach, like let it be. Like, and I think a lot of these anime and manga studios kind of look at it, it's like, well, it's like free advertising for them. It really is.
Well, technically, I think that's really optimistic to say that it's free advertising. Because, like, at what point does free advertising turn into lost profits? Like, where does that line get drawn? Because if they licensed it, would they be making more money than if they just let it go by themselves?
I think that there's actually a good point to be made here. So one of the articles that I looked at while researching this topic referenced a survey that was done of about 4,000 doujinshi artists. And basically says that of the people that go to like the big convention, like the Doujinshi conventions every year, like, you know, Comiket and others like that, only like the top 10 or so percent ever walk away with more than like $2,000 worth of like profit from these events where these doujinshi are sold. Most people barely make a profit at all. Or, well, some people barely make a profit at all. Most don't even make a profit by selling this stuff. So there's a case to be made that these people are actually doing advertising for these properties and making a loss by doing it.
You could say that, but they're just one person selling their merchandise. If they had the backing of the company that could mass produce their work and sell it on multiple venues, it might actually be profitable for them, for the big companies to actually license the doujinshi.
It might. And I mean, there's a case to be made that some like properties, copyright holders of properties could actually license this doujinshi, make it legitimate, and make a ton of money doing it.
Because honestly, like when I'm looking at derivative works for like peripheral works to buy relating to anime manga, like figures, Blu-rays, doujinshi is like one of the most like appealing derivative peripheral things to get, because I don't know, it's like I like it, so it's a good appeal for me.
It's certainly a way to bring in some revenue, even if it's not a whole lot. It certainly would account for some. But I forgot where I was going with this.
For your advertising.
I think that, so for you, I'm sure, I think you and I have talked about this before. So have you ever actually gone and seen a doujinshi for a property that you have, like an anime or a manga you've never actually read or watched, and then because of that doujinshi you actually went and read or watched what it was based off of?
Yeah, Token Rambu.
There you go.
Yeah.
It advertised itself to you through doujinshi and you bought into it.
Exactly. Literally.
Exactly.
I actually, like, I watched the anime on Crunchyroll. I bought like a bajillion keychains.
Yeah. And you probably wouldn't have done that if you hadn't read the doujinshi first. I mean, maybe you would have through word of mouth, but I think that there's a strong case to be made that in that particular instance, like you described with Togen Rambu, it advertised itself to you through the doujinshi that was made by independent artists.
Yeah, I would not be, like, Token Rambu is originally a game, and I don't have the patience to play it. It's like collect them all and then battle with them, all the boys, collect the boys and battle with them. Like, I don't have the patience for that. But
it's like a gachapon game, really.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, but I don't have the patience for that, so I would just, but the doujinshi I have the patience for.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was the same way with Tales of Zestiria. I had never played a Tales game before, and I never saw the Tales of Zestiria anime, but I saw the doujinshi, which some of it you linked to me that was awesome, and it actually got me to go watch it and play the game.
Exactly.
So I still recommend the doujinshi over everything else, though.
Nice.
No, the games actually not half bad. But in that sense, I think it's definitely good advertising for these people, because I went and I bought the Tales of Zestiria game. I watched Tales of Zestiria was it on Crunchyroll?
No,
yeah.
It was on Funimation.
Yes, I watched it on Funimation, which, yes, I actually still have a fucking subscription to Funimation that I pay for every month. Yeah, I think it's good advertising. I think anything that's done by, like, fan art is good advertising too, and like that's something that no one ever talks about, really. Even like doujinshi is essentially fan art, but just like highly produced fan art that's done in like a serial format. Whereas like no one ever talks about the fan art. Like, theoretically, you could argue that fan art is in and of itself a violation of copyright.
Yep.
And especially you can especially do it because a lot of independent artists who make fan art do so on commission, so they're getting paid to do it.
I see.
I mean, if they're just making it for themselves and they throw it up online, it's like, oh well, no money's been made and whatever. I guess you can say that there's no profit loss for the copyright holder. But in terms of these artists who do commissions for the fan art, especially artists who do commissions for very lewd fan art, you could certainly say there's a copyright violation going on, because some of these artists who are like really well known end up charging $200-$300 for some fan art.
I guess. But like, I mean, you're right, but I'd say the fan art industry is less lucrative than the doujinshi industry, because like doujinshi you sell to multiple people, but fan art you're only selling to the one person that commissioned it.
True, but in the spirit of the law, it's essentially the same thing.
Yeah, except actually where there's a lot of people on Patreon that do lewd fan art for multiple people, and you have to pay for it. So that kind of setup would actually be pretty lucrative, and it goes against the spirit of copyright.
And there are some people on that do that on Patreon who quite legitimately make a living off of it. Like, it may not be the best living in the world, but they make enough to, live and pay their bills and shit doing that.
Yep.
So I think that's something that it never gets talked about, but it's certainly in the same way that doujinshi violates copyright. It leads the spirit of it, I think. One of the things that this whole copyright argument brings to light is, so in the West we have this concept of fair use, which is something that a lot of people have issues with, especially in how it's interpreted. It's been over the last few years on YouTube. I think that Google and YouTube have used it in pretty nefarious ways to shut a bunch of people down for very not really great reasons, certainly not very strong reasons. But so the idea of fair use essentially comes down to this idea that, okay, so you can use a certain portion of a copyrighted work as long as it's transformative in some way. And a lot of this is used, especially on YouTube, for people who make like commentary or criticism of copyrighted works, where they'll show clips or sections of that copyrighted work to prove a point or to criticize a specific aspect of it. Some people get copyright strikes on YouTube, like us, for doing such a thing. But do you personally think, Sho, that doujinshi is transformative enough to survive that fair use clause?
I don't think so, at least not from a Canadian perspective, because you're basically just writing a fan fiction and then drawing it out.
Yeah. Well, you're writing fan fiction, then illustrating it.
Exactly. Which is, to me, is not transformative. I think that's just, you're just stealing the IP of the person you're stealing from and just writing your own story. I mean, commentary and criticism, is necessary to be protected by fair use, because how can we discuss it if it'll break the law? But like writing your own story based on these characters and then selling it is, I think it's not transformative enough.
Now, what if, like, say someone were to create a doujinshi that had all original characters in it, but used a setting that was already established in another work? It had an original story with original characters. Would that be transformative enough?
If the setting is iconic enough, then I think it wouldn't be transformative. It all depends on, like, is the selling point of the doujinshi the setting, or does no one care about that? Because if no one cares about that, then I don't think it matters. But if that's the selling point, I think it's not transformative.
I guess that's a fair enough point. This idea of transformative, at least here in the West, and most specifically here in America, was kind of worked out in the Supreme Court with, trials over fair use over the years. And transformative is kind of left up to the copyright holder, honestly, which is why you see so many people getting content ID strikes and copyright strikes on YouTube for posting this stuff. And I don't think it's necessarily right. I really think here in the West, personally, I think we should take a more Japanese approach to some of this. I especially think that the
the what was I going with this? Oh, like the music industry or the movie industry should really take a Japanese approach to this. And actually, I think that the Japanese sort of approach doujinshi in the same way that like video game manufacturers in the West have regarded these Let's Players on YouTube. Whereas they kind of leave them alone as long as they're not inherently bashing the studio or the people that make it or, you know, stuff like that. And they're just playing the game to show it off. I honestly think there's nothing wrong with that.
Honestly, you're right. Like, Let's Plays are very much similar to Doujinshi, and I think they go against the spirit of copyright, but, like, the companies don't care. They just let it happen.
Yeah. And I think that it's not even said, like, the anime industry kind of turns a blind eye to Doujinshi, but yet when some people, like, on YouTube try to post, like, criticism videos with clips from anime, a lot of times that gets taken down and they have to rework it and they have to do these little tricks to trick the system, like flipping the image or, you know, applying image filters on top of it so that it looks different and it doesn't get caught by the content ID system. And I really think that while anime and manga studios are really good at leaving doujinshi artists alone, I really think they need to do the same thing to people that criticize their work.
They should, but the reason why they don't care about doujinshi and they do care about the YouTube videos is because there's a whole culture in doujinshi, and there's other reasons besides free advertising to keep doujinshi in the legal area. But there's not so much a culture of criticism videos, so they're like, fuck that.
True. I think this idea of criticism is like kind of, I hate to use this term, but foreign to these Japanese companies. I don't think in Japan you have people like Digipro or Gigak who pull out or, you know, throw out these videos where they're constantly criticizing and commenting on the state of the industry or the state of certain shows or studios and stuff like that.
Who knows? I don't speak Japanese. I wouldn't be able to watch it anyways.
If there are, they're not prominent outside of Japan.
Yeah, that's
because
true.
I haven't. Yeah,
because we haven't heard of it, and we are the test for how prominent a person is, whether we've heard it or not.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just saying that, like, you think if someone was really prominent outside of Japan who did that kind of stuff, we at least heard about them.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of something that the Japanese don't really get into that much. But what you mentioned that there are other reasons that doujinshi kind of stays in this legal gray area intentionally. I think one of those that I definitely deserves to be mentioned is the fact that a lot of mangaka who end up, well, not a lot, I'll say a certain percentage of mangaka who end up getting big are mangaka who started out producing doujinshi.
Yeah. And now that like the doujinshi writer has become the published mangaka, they feel bad for punishing other doujinshi writers who are writing about their published manga, and then the cycle continues and continues. Like, just keep doubling down.
One of the articles that I read about this actually came up with a really good like way to describe it, where the doujinshi artists become the mangaka, and then the mangaka don't go after the doujinshi artists. They said instead of it being a vicious cycle of, you know, cease and desist, it becomes a virtuous cycle of live and let live and raise up.
I guess so. It's kind of like it's not like this at all, but it's like, I relate this to how, you know, how Crunchyroll was an illegal streamer before, and then they became a legal streamer, but people still hate illegal streaming sites.
Yeah, that's why Crunchyroll would not be where it is today if it had not started out as an illegal streaming
that's where
site.
the cycle stops.
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't make sense with this virtuous cycle. Doesn't make sense. It's like, it's still bad when you did initially.
True, but
if it raises the industry up and it raises your craft up, is it really that bad?
I don't know. Is illegal streaming bad?
Yeah.
That's a counter to your point.
I do want to point out two very prominent mangaka who this has actually happened to, where they started out as doujinshi artists and ended up becoming pretty big deals within the manga community. One of them is Kyohiko Azuma, perhaps best known for his two manga, Azumanga Daioh and Yotsuba To. By the way, Yotsuba is adorable, and you should definitely read it. So is Azumanga Daioh, and the anime for Azumanga Daioh is absolutely wonderful. And then another one, probably a little less prominent, is Chika Umino, who is the creator of the manga, two manga, Honey and Clover and March Comes in Like a Lion, both of which are pretty big successes. And then, of course, you have probably one of the most notorious doujinshi groups, or what they're called circles, in back in the 80s and 90s was Clamp, and now that they've become really big for stuff like Chobits, Cardcaptor Sakura, and X. So, and let's be honest, you wouldn't have had Code Geass without Clamp. So
I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, honey. Oh,
I don't
honey.
know. Do you like spaghetti limbs?
Not necessarily.
Because that's what Clamp is known for. There's spaghetti limbs. Although people love Cardcaptor Sakura too.
Oh yeah, it's
Like,
iconic.
If you grew up in the 90s, I mean, and in the early 2000s watching anime, you probably have a soft spot in your heart for Cardcaptor Sakura. So it's certainly kind of an interesting spot in terms of like an artistic industry where these people who are blatantly violating copyright, it's kind of like a way for them to get into the industry that they love.
Yeah.
Because like you have, and it's gotten to the point now where these anime studios and manga studios are kind of so laissez-faire about this. They'll send representatives to these doujinshi like conventions, and they'll actively seek out new talent from them.
Which really confuses me. It's like the manga industry is so on the fence. Like they want to get involved in the doujinshi sort of like industry, but they don't at the same time. It's like, no, don't, you do your own thing. We won't prosecute you. We won't license you. We won't interact with you. But at the same time, we're going to keep an eye on you. We want your talent. We want to actually publish you, but we don't want to get in your way. We don't want to, support this, but we do want to support this. Like, come to our industry. Like, girl, just do one or the other. Like,
it's sort of schizophrenic in that regard, isn't it?
Oh my God. Like, either ban it, like prosecute it, or, incorporate it and license it and sell it. Like, I don't understand what they're doing right now. Right now, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah,
but whatever.
Does that make what they're doing, like, from a business standpoint, ethical? That they're kind of rewarding people who are blatantly violating copyright?
I don't think it's ethical, because I think they're losing profits. Because I think that doujinshi is a really hot commodity that they're not taking advantage of.
So and you think it would be better for these manga studios if they came in and they said, they said, let us license this.
Yeah, like the manga studio or the manga artist is the one who put in all the work developing these characters, and then these derivative works are like getting really popular, even though they're not selling that well because they don't have any infrastructure to sell them, but they're getting really popular. And it was the original manga's like fault, or not fault, but like the reason why it got so popular as it trickled down to doujinshi comes back to the original manga, but their hard work isn't being rewarded because they don't want to take on the doujinshi industry. So to me, it's not ethical.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing out that while a lot of anime and manga studios in Japan turn a blind eye to what they're doing, not all of them do. Some of them have. There are a minority that will say, like, listen, we won't necessarily go after you, but just please don't. So probably one of the biggest examples of that is Trigger. Like they will not actively go after anyone who produces doujinshi of their work, but every time they produce something, they're like, please don't. And actually, so when I went to Otakon earlier this year and some representatives from Studio Trigger were there, someone actually asked them this question. It's like, why do you guys have like this aversion to people doing doujinshi of your work? And there was a long silence, and Yoshinari finally said, we think of these characters as our children. We really would like to not see our children get like sexualized.
Well, actually, John isn't here, but a point that he brought up is that he allegedly finds it unethical when these pure characters get looted by Rule 34. So I don't know if that's an issue.
Well, and part of the reason I bring up Trigger is because currently, we're recording this in fall 2018, so currently there is a Trigger show airing called SSSS Gridman, and it's actually a partnership with Tsuburaya, which is a company that historically will actually go after people for producing doujinshi of their work, and it's been kind of over the last few weeks since this show started airing, there's a character in it that has some really thick thighs that people love to lewd, myself included. And people are like really itching to make doujinshi with these characters, and they're like, no. And then finally, Tsuburaya finally caved and said, all right, I guess.
Nice.
Because Trigger was going by their stalwart, like, we won't say anything, but please don't. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to these doujinshi, honestly.
Have fun.
But I kind of do get John's point that you mentioned, like, you know, and I mentioned it earlier, it's like there's these characters that already have established personality traits and established motives and everything, and you're putting them, especially if it's a really highly sexual doujinshi, it's like you're putting these characters in situations like, this is not what this character would do in this situation.
Or like, you know, there's an issue that comes up when you have these shows that are quite obviously not supposed to have 18 plus content in it, like kids shows. Yeah. That become looted by doujinshi artists. And, you know,
like Pokemon.
Pokemon, sure. I don't know if it would be in the rights owner's best interest to license that or not.
No. I can assuredly tell you that it's a big no.
Yeah, so that's an issue in and of itself.
Yeah, it is. I think in that case, should they go after people who do this? I still don't think so. I still think in the end that makes them look bad. But they certainly should distance themselves from it. It's like, we don't agree with this, we don't support this, but we're not going to go after you for doing it.
I don't know. All I say, I am biased because there's a lot of IPs that are not meant to be looted that I enjoy looting. So I'm biased towards the loots, honey.
Like literally any anime series that has even one shota in it.
Exactly.
It's like, you look at that shota is mine. Get away, it's mine now.
It's like, okay, like, not even lying. There's some kid shows that are like, I don't even like the character designs. I don't even like anything about the show. It's stupid and annoying, and I don't want to deal with it. But then, like, the doujinshi is good. So I'm like, I really like this doujinshi. But I really don't like the show or anything else about it.
Why couldn't you, doujinshi creator, make this as the story of this thing I like?
Exactly.
I mean, yeah, I completely understand. I have had situations like that in my life.
Very nice.
And I think there's also another part of why the doujinshi artists aren't sort of gone after, and that's just the non-confrontational nature of the Japanese.
It could be.
There's certainly a dissuasion within Japanese within modern Japanese culture of avoiding conflict whenever possible, and there's also like this antithesis of frivolous lawsuits. So it's like, if you're not gonna gain anything from this lawsuit, why initiate it in the first place?
Yeah, and I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, because like this sort of non-confrontational culture has its pros and cons over the very confrontational American culture, but I don't know if this particular aspect is good or bad.
Well, America's legal system is certainly confrontational. In fact, it's literally called an adversarial legal system.
Exactly.
But again, and you look at America, and there are a fair number of what a lot of people would consider frivolous lawsuits in this country, especially regarding copyright.
Oh, honey, just tune into Judge Judy, honey. Want frivolous legal suits?
The most frivolous of all frivolousness.
Oh, honey, we made a TV show about how frivolous our suits are. Oh, honey.
I know. But yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword for sure, because I think there is a potential. It's a very narrow potential, but I think the potential certainly exists that like an individual doujinshi artist could make it really big and start making a ton of money, like a ton of money. They could find a way to get like a distribution net in service. They could find a way to hire people to do marketing for them, and like, if that happens, are these companies still going to be as non-confrontational? Because then you could certainly make the case that if that ever happens, you could be losing profit by not actually going after this.
Well, then at that point, it's like, is it even doujinshi anymore? Because it's become so established.
If it's using the derivative works or derivative characters, then yes, it is.
But it's not, because it's not catering to a specific audience anymore because it's so popular.
True, it would cater to a much more broad audience for sure. So, you actually bring up a good point. Would it even be considered doujinshi at that point, or would it just be considered something else? I think you would have a stronger case to go after someone for copyright, though, if they're using characters that are already established.
I think when doujinshi artists become too big, then they'll get prosecuted. But they don't.
And then what happens? What happens if the doujinshi that these artists make end up becoming more popular than the actual show or manga that they're based off of?
I don't know.
I know, like, it's a very
then the
rare...
doujinshi artist sues the IP holder.
Like, this is mine now, bitch.
I did it better, bitch.
It's like it's a narrow like possibility that could happen, but it's certainly not outside the realms of possibility that could happen one day. I mean, hell,
and
you never know. I mean, with online distribution, you never know what could happen.
You never know what's gonna go viral, honey.
I think one last point I would like to make, which is something I did read in another one of these articles, is that there is certainly a possibility that this sort of laissez-faire attitude might be ending soon. There is an organization in Japan called the JASRAC, or JASRAC, which is the Japanese Society for Rights of Authors, Composers, and Publishers, which for now pretty much only polices the Japanese music industry. But they've said that they are trying to expand their reach into art and literature. So this could actually be a really bad thing for doujinshi artists, because the JASRAC is known for initiating some very, shall we say, punitive lawsuits against people for doing pretty innocuous things. One of them is they tried to charge people for tweeting Japanese song lyrics on Twitter. And they also fined over 200 small businesses for committing the crime of playing music on iPods during business hours.
Wait, how can you prosecute tweets if you're not making money out of it?
this is the kind of thing that I'm not condoning it in any way. I'm just saying that this is the kind of thing that this organization is known for within the Japanese music industry. Like, they are essentially like God in the Japanese music industry.
Oh, Japan. It's either one extreme or the other.
Exactly. And I think that the Jazz Rack is something that is modeled almost entirely out of stuff from the American legal system, where you have these like societies and organizations that exist solely to prosecute people who violate copyright. And they will seek out the most innocuous forms of copyright infringement that you can think of, and they will prosecute those people to the absolute fullest extent of the law.
Gotta meet them quotas.
Apparently. I mean, and I get it, and I think a lot of people do too. Like, artists who create these things for, you know, manga studios and anime studios deserve to get paid for their work. They deserve to be rewarded for the work they do. But I also don't think that they should forget where they came from, because every single manga artist and animator started out as an amateur, which is exactly what doujinshi artists are, amateurs.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a fucked up system that is wrong.
All right, so I think I'll end this by asking one final question. Do you think, all things being considered, that doujinshi actually hurts or helps the manga and anime industries?
In the current state, I say no. That it hurts the industry. Also, I'd like to point out that, like, I know about the manga industry, but the anime industry is kind of in the shitter. They're like barely making any profits, so clearly something needs to be changed. And doujinshi might be.
I want to stop you real quick. Hold on. The state of the current anime industry can't all be laid at the feet of doujinshi.
I know, but
so a lot of that is mismanagement of studios.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But I mean, there's clearly the current system is not working. So I would say the current doujinshi system is not working either. Because they're on the fence, like I said. Either absorb it into your own like selling infrastructure, or, you know, prosecute it. Don't be on the fence. And I don't think the advertising is good enough versus the lost profits. Because honestly, if it's big enough for you to get advertising from it, it's big enough for you to get profits from it. So I don't see that. That really doesn't make sense to me. And I think that they're being stupid right now with how they're handling the doujinshi industry.
Fair enough. I think that by and large, it's not like killing the industry right now. I think it's certainly not necessarily helping enormously. But I do definitely agree with your point that I think, if not necessarily absorb, but I think manga and anime studios should be more open to the idea of licensing some of this doujinshi out to the people that make it, and so that you can create sort of this, that doesn't necessarily have to be 50-50, but like a profit sharing thing, where it's like the doujinshi artist can make some money, and then the copyright holder can license it, and they can make a little bit of money on the side from it.
Yep, that would make sense.
I think going forward, that would be a far more number one, profitable, and number two, wise decision for these two industries, because they don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. They can help each other.
Japan and the manga industry clearly wants to cooperate with the doujinshi industry, but they're just like, I don't want to go that far. No, not that far.
And I think there is one thing we haven't talked about that I think could really, really change the game here. So and this frustrates me to no end. For a nation that seems so devoted to like technological advancement, Japan seems utterly unwilling to embrace like stuff like online streaming and online distribution of stuff like manga and anime. And I think that could be a huge way to generate profits in doujinshi, because you would no longer necessarily have to be constrained to a pen and paper. You could produce all of this stuff digitally and ship it anywhere in the world.
Yeah, that's a
to people who are
problem
willing
with
to pay.
Japan in general, with anime and manga as well.
Which frustrates me so much for a company that loves to flout its technological progress. They are so unwilling to embrace this idea of online distribution of content.
I mean, I can understand because the industry was like founded on physical media, and it's mostly been funded through local sales. But you know, they're really missing out on the international market, and it's a huge market. It's international.
Hey, let me tell you something. In terms of doujinshi, thirst is a universal language.
Oh, honey, don't I know?
All right. Well, thank you all there for dropping in to listen to us. We hope you enjoyed it because we always enjoy bringing this stuff to you. If you want to check out previous episodes of the podcast, you can find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, and iTunes. By the way, I do want to mention, tell us, what you think about this. I mean, what are your thoughts on doujinshi? Is it good for the industry? Is it bad? Let us know in the comments down below. If you want to keep up with what we're doing and have a little more fun, you can join our Discord server, become a member of our Facebook group, follow our Twitch channel, and visit our website. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, criticisms, or concerns on this or any episode, feel free to shoot us an email. Links to all of these things will be down below in the description. As always, I have been your host, Alex, and I will see you next time. Say goodnight, show.
I won't say goodnight until I've read a good doujinshi.
I'll link you one. Don't worry.
Good.